Hello to all cinema fans. This is Film Anatomy. In this video, we want to introduce 5 important gangster movies in the history of cinema. I should also add that this is not our last video about gangster cinema, and in the next videos, we will talk more about gangster movies. So subscribe to our channel, push the bell to get notified of our next videos. Number 1. Little Caesar. 1931. Little Caesar movie by Mervyn LeRoy. The first movie of the lasting gangster trilogy of early 1930s starring Edward G. Robinson. The movie starts with a short scene, which shows us a murder at a gas station. After that, we go to the 2 main characters named Rico, played by Edward J. Robinson, and Joe. From some aspects, this scene can introduce us to the manifesto of characterization in gangster cinema. During the movie, we don't know much about Rico's past, and this feature is not similar to many other gangster movies of that epoch, which usually tell us the background of the main character at least to a general context. Also, during the movie, we never see Rico in a relationship with women, and this is an unusual element in the genre of gangster cinema. On the other hand, Rico, at least for some part of the movie, is not a showy person at all, and this seems a little unusual in the world of gangsters, who use every opportunity to show off. But Rico gradually changes, and this change causes his downfall. The problem starts when Rico welcomes his picture to be published in the newspaper. Now he doesn't just want to be the boss, he wants everyone to know that he is the boss, and being the boss becomes his fatal flaw. Don't forget that the first unsuccessful attack on Rico happens when he goes to the street to buy several copies of newspapers in which his picture is published. This desire to show off in the end even leads to revealing his hiding place. Flaherty is a policeman who follows Rico and, knowing this weakness, introduces Rico in the newspaper as a coward who cannot manage the situation. Rico gets angry after hearing this and calls him, and this call causes his phone to be traced. Little Caesar is considered one of the most important gangster movies in the early 30s. You will enjoy the acting of Edward J. Robinson and the deliberate direction of Mervyn LeRoy. Number 2. Public Enemy. The movie The Public Enemy by William Wellman is from 1931. In this movie, compared to a character like Rico in the movie Little Caesar, Tom Powers, played by James Cagney, is considered a more exemplary character for showing a typical movie gangster. In The Public Enemy, unlike Little Caesar, we see a return to the roots once again. The story of the movie begins in 1909, Tom's childhood. We see his family's poverty at the beginning of the story and that he starts his work with small thefts since he was a child. Tom's father's behavior is another element that is emphasized in the Chinese introduction of the story, where Tom is bully and doesn't have appropriate behavior, and his father beats him with a belt without saying a word to him. Therefore, here the same 2 factors are mentioned as the roots of the formation of gangsterism, which was mostly considered in movies like Revival. In the movie, we are witness of the social realism of Wellman in showing the street kids. He even depicts the images of the last day when people could drink, i.e. before the liquor law, to strengthen the social realism of his movie. The movie not only begins with Tom Powers' childhood, but somehow ends with a metaphorical representation of him as a baby in the final. In the final scene, when the body of Tom Powers is sent to the door of his house, he is wrapped in a cloth as if wrapped in a swaddling cloth, just like an infant. And with this sequence, the immaturity of the gangsters and their helplessness and their childish behavior are pointed out, a kind of childlike innocence in the face of a cruel world. Number 3. Scarface. Scarface is a 1932 movie directed by Howard Hawks. In the movie Scarface, we are dealing with a gangster named Tony Camonte, played by Paul Muni. The screenwriters of Scarface, Howard Hawks and Ben Hecht, have a more brutal attitude towards gangsters. They introduce childish and extremely cruel people, whose lives seem to be devoid of normal human values. On the other hand, the movie makers almost completely remove the society in the movie Scarface, in such a way that we are practically involved in the crazy competition of gangs, which mostly have one thing in common. All of them are childish and lack the understanding of an adult. In most minutes of the movie, we are faced with the internal conflict and the gangsters shelling, in a way that doesn't seem to have any ambitious goals and goes towards violence for the sake of violence. Therefore, the couple of Howard Hawks and Ben Hackett in the story-like and visual pattern of gangster cinema. This makes the cinema empty of the previous ambitious goals and give these people an absurd form. Great critics such as Robin Wood, while watching Scarface, have pointed out that when we see Tony Camonte's crouching shadow on the wall, we feel as if we are seeing an ape or a Neanderthal man, a person who has not evolved, a person who is very childish and behaves very childishly instead of wisely in daily conflicts. Number 4. Angels with Dirty Faces, 1938. The fourth movie that we introduce to you in the history of gangster cinema is Angels with Dirty Faces. In the late 1930s, gangsters are still alive and strong. Gangster movies are popular. Studios like Warner Brothers also tended to make gangster movies because these movies were made cheap. James Cagney, who managed to get himself out of the bound of exclusive contract with this company due to a legal dispute over his contract with Warner Brothers in the court, lost the lawsuit in the appeal court and was forced to return to Warner Brothers Company. When he came back, he brought the script of Angels with Dirty Faces with him so that he could play a role other than the smart kid. The role of Rocky Sullivan allowed him to show his acting ability. 4 years before he directed Casablanca, Michael Curtiz showed up and directed Angels with Dirty Faces. In that year, Curtiz had made 2 movies, Four Daughters and The Adventures of Robin Hood, for Warner Brothers. Number 5. The Roaring Twenties. The fifth movie that we introduce to you is the Roaring Twenties movie produced in 1939. In the last dialogue of this movie, we hear this sentence: "He used to be a big shot." This last dialogue of the Roaring Twenties is considered one of the most popular dialogues in the history of gangster cinema. Of course, knowing that this movie made the people of Western countries remember the 20s as a passionate decade years, later makes us understand how much movies can affect our culture, and especially in this movie, the American culture. The Roaring Twenties is a story of the rise and fall of gangsters of the 20s. James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart appeared at the peak and Raoul Walsh made and directed one of his best movies. In a survey, Empire magazine considered this movie the most underrated gangster movie in the history of cinema. This is one of the best works that came out of the heart of the studio as a factory. This is one of the 11 movies that Ryan Wall made between 1930 and 1939, one of the 4 screenplays that Jerry Wald wrote in 1939, and one of the 7 movies in which Humphrey Bogart acted. All these alongside each other make the movie of the Roaring Twenties one of the most lasting movies in the history of gangster movies. The Roaring Twenties, a first-class product starring James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart and a great director like Raoul Walsh. In this video, we introduced 5 important gangster movies in the history of cinema. Movies that have pure gangster atmospheres and captivate every viewer. If you are interested in gangster movies as well as pure classic movies, be sure to put these movies on your watch list. Tell us in the comments which of the gangster movies in the history of cinema you have memories with. In order not to miss our next videos, we suggest that you subscribe to the Film Anatomy channel. Wait for our next video. Goodbye.